Today I'm going to show you how to make a mallet using some Padauk and some American white oak. I measured all of the pieces of wood to the right dimensions. I cut the pieces of wood using my tenon saw, and then for some of the pieces I used my normal hand saw. Obviously you can see I don't have a bandsaw, so this took a very long time to do by hand. If you had a bandsaw you could just rip all these pieces to the right dimensions, which would be much quicker. I had never worked with Padauk before and was really surprised at how bright orange the sawdust came out. I cut the handle to a dimension of 30 centimetres. I used my hand saw to do this. You could do this much quicker if you had a table saw or a bandsaw, but I didn't, so I just made use of what I had. I would recommend using a woodworker's vise to hold this piece of wood, as it would allow you to cut it much better, but I don't have a woodworker's vise, so I use my engineer's vise instead. I then made the parts which the handle would slot into. I then measured the handle parts. These needed to be 30mm in their dimension, as it would allow me to slot the handle into it. I recently passed 100 subscribers, which is a really big milestone for me, so I'm really thankful for all of you who subscribed. There'll be a 100 subscriber giveaway coming very soon. I had this offcut of Padauk which I was going to use to make a wedge, however this was actually too small, so I ended up cutting another piece of Padauk to make the wedge with. I then cut 10mm off of each of the handle ends, because one of the ends had paint on it and this end needed a bit of clean-up work on it. I used my tri-square to mark this and then used my Excalibur tenon saw to cut this off. If you want to see me unbox this tenon saw, I'll link a video up at the top. I then applied some Gorilla Glue to the bottom of the Padauk and glued the two pieces of white oak to the bottom of it. I really recommend this Gorilla Glue as it's really strong. I used my finger to spread this, being careful not to get any glue in the bit where the handle would be seated. Whilst I'm gluing this up, I wanted to let you know I have a blog now, so I'll link that blog post down below. Equally, I have a website, Pinterest, Instagram and Facebook, which I'll also link below in this video. I then used some F-style clamps to clamp this up and left it to dry for a few hours. I wasn't too fussed about this being perfect, as it was all going to get sanded later on anyway, and a 5-degree angle would be added to the outside of the hammer. I recommend you put the hammer handle inside the hammer whilst clamping this up, as it means you get a really tight fit with the hammer handle. I then cut the Padauk wedge to size, however I realised this wasn't actually the right size of Padauk, because it wouldn't fit the hammer handle and I hadn't anticipated this earlier on. This didn't particularly matter, it just meant I had to cut another wedge later on. I cut 3 of these wedges as I wasn't sure how many I was going to need, and I also didn't know whether any of them were going to break or not, although none of these actually worked as they were all the wrong size, so I ended up cutting another one anyway. I then glued the other piece of Padauk to the hammer body. I sanded the outside of the hammer handle with 40 grit before moving up to 180 grit. I added a slight chamfer to the outside of the hammer handle so it fit comfortably in my hand. If you don't have an electric sander, you could of course do this by hand, but it would take a lot longer. And these detail sanders aren't particularly expensive for the value they provide. I cut a 5-degree angle on the hammer body, using my miter saw first to mark the point, and then using my tenon saw to cut it as it was much quicker. Again I used my Bosch PSM 80A sander to sand all over this hammer body. This took about half an hour to sand it all nice and flush, as I wanted a really nice finish to the outside of the hammer, even though it was going to get used and abused anyway. I then cut a slot down the centre of the hammer handle, which would accept the wedge later on. I then cut up the Padauk wedge and tried to slot it in. I found this to be an absolute nightmare though. As you can see, I first glued in the hammer body to the hammer handle and then I tried to put the wedge in, although I found this very difficult and it resulted in me messing it up quite a few times, although eventually I got there in the end. I applied some oil over the whole of the hammer body and the hammer handle. I was really happy with how this project turned out, and I'm definitely going to be making some more hammers in the future. I applied a very generous coat of oil over the whole of the hammer, as I could wipe the excess off later using a clean rag. I really like the contrast between the Padauk and the American white oak, as it creates a really nice look to the hammer. The next hammer I make will be made with sapele and a bit of American white oak as well, as I still have plenty of wood left. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed it.